Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll be going to do another good old classic modeling in Houdini. So last time I did that was a few years ago, where I did a few of these boolean operation modeling. And I wanted to basically do something similar now. What you see right here is the end result. I modeled the X in Houdini. I made it then into Substance Painter and put it in Unreal 5 to make some nicer images. So to start with here in Houdini, what the first thing that I will do is I will actually now get some reference. As you want to 3D model anything, usually what you want is get some reference. And I would actually use the reference node itself. So I already looked up reference images, and we can essentially just load them with this reference images node. So here we just fill in the picture. So my picture is roughly this X that I try to bring out of the perspective it was taken from. The X itself, you can see here on the bottom the specific naming of this X in case you want to build something similar or get some of these references. You can just look this up as well. So I roughly will make something like this. The tutorial is not necessarily about making everything 100% perfect. It's just about the general flow of how to build this and modify this. Over time, you can easily change things. I mean, everything is procedural or it's node based, so we can always go to the nodes, change the curves, change the data, modify it, tweak it. So you can always go back and forward if you want it. And to start with, usually we will just make geometry. So we want to go into a geometry layer or geometry editing. We will now have here our empty network and we will spawn a curve system. So I will sort of like trace the X that I have. And we have different curve options. So we can see that we have the normal curve Bezier, intersection, polygon, spline. So these are a couple of curves. We also have draw curve. Usually what you want to use is the normal curve node. This also comes with presets. So Bezier is just essentially a preset from curve. This will use Bezier curves, which are the more rounding curves. We also have polygon and spline curves. These are all also different options that we can use. So let's bring down, for example, a Bezier curve. And if we will now click here on our handle, we can now click and draw a line. So with the Bezier curve, what's special about it is if you will hold your mouse, you can see you can create these nice Bezier curves or these nice rounded curves. So we can see that we can create essentially these type of lines to help us trace the shape. Now, if you would go to a different mode, you can see we have the same modes that we had in the tab menu as well. If I do reset operation, switch to polygon curve, I can only now draw in simple polygons. I won't have any fancy curves. I will just make simple polygon lines like this. So let's reset this again, like so. So I will do a Bezier curve. It will give us nice and smoother edges along the shapes, and it will overall be more useful that way. So now how to preview our mesh. In case you did not see a reference, we're going to go here to the side and we're going to say show all objects. So we'll show all the objects that are in Houdini that you loaded. Then we're going to press spacebar 3 to go in the side view or the front view. You can also click it here and go to front view. And now we will essentially go and start to trace with the line. So let's reset it again. So essentially what we want to do is do a simple trace, and we can always modify it slightly afterwards. And make sure you're on this handle. So this handle will make it possible to draw. And we have also a few different options to do things and a bunch of options here as well. So the first one is to edit. So in case we draw something, we can just click on this to then start editing. This is just a simple basic drawing mode. So if you just click, you have a line. If you hold, you will have these type of lines. We also have an option to call to Bezier smooth mode. This might be useful. So let's maybe try that and see if we can get something interesting with that. So you can see it might not be always perfect. Like for example, in this case, we might need to then later on fine tune this a bit. Again, we are not necessarily aiming to get it perfectly from the first start, but just getting a base shape in there is already more than enough. So I'm just going to get a small corner maybe here. Maybe here there is also some tiny corner. I will probably come back here to this part, tweak that a bit. the auto mode is not necessarily perfect, as you can see. I will just connect it like so. So we have roughly that curve in place. Again, this is not perfect at all. I'm going to go to here, this edit mode, and this edit mode allows us to essentially just grab stuff and move them around. We can also here modify our shapes back to, for example, make a corner point. We can also grab here the lines, and I will just align it like so. I will just align it with the X, so it's not that much of a difference. Same here. Let's just take corner and just manually tweak it until it's more of a perfect corner, like so. Here as well. We can also do smoothing or balance out the points. Sometimes it doesn't do always what you want, so I just usually manually just jump in and drag the lines like so. You can always, maybe in this case, put them a bit closer. I don't want to have a big beveling here. Like so, I think that's roughly good enough. Doesn't have to be perfect again. Yeah, here this situation. Let's do some tweaking to these points. Let's make the curves way more smaller. And we can also delete points in case we don't want them. So maybe I place too much, and don't be too scared to just simply delete them. It's sometimes easier to delete afterwards than add back in here as well. Maybe I just delete them and swap this out with a corner selection like so. That makes sense. This curve is pretty nice, maybe a bit too much. Let's drive that over here. And yeah, this is mainly about fine-tuning that shape. Here I'll switch this to corner as well. Let's align it with that point. Let's align this with this point. And we can see that this one, this shape needs to be a bit smaller, like so. Yeah, that's better. Here as well, maybe let's delete one point and convert this to maybe a corner. So let's delete, place it over here, move to corner, and let's modify it like so. And we have, I think, our base shape. We can always come back to this and improve. Maybe let's make this bevel a bit smaller. So maybe here as well. So we roughly have what I expect. This is the base shape that we have now for our, let's press space 1, and we can also go back here and switch to our view. So this is the shape. If we will now preview the points, we have a bunch of points. Just to be sure, a few things we can do now to make it workable with other systems is we can convert it. So there is a chance that this might still be in certain Bezier curves or NURBS curves. We can always convert this here as well by simply converting. We can also do a resampling in case you want that. A resample will essentially again add more points based on a distance, so the distance here can be quite small, and this would just add points along the same spacing. So we can, for example, do convert node. I will also use the facet node, and in here there is a very useful function which is called remove inline points. This function, it will automatically pop in here. It will delete points that are on the same line. So you can see it, for example, here on this blade, or you can see it here on this top piece. So everyone that has the same roughly positioning will be deleted. So we need to tweak this value. And based on the size of your object, this can be large, this can be small. So I probably want to add an additional 0 like so, a 0, 1, and we have something like this, or maybe a bit more. I think so, that this is fine. We just need to have enough detail, but also not too much, too little. It's somewhere finding that balance between what is just good enough. In this case, at this stage, don't worry too much about poly counts. We will handle that in later stages. Right now, it's just about getting the shape that we want and having a mid polymorph rather than high or low. In case you want to have additional beveling, let's say we don't feel there is enough beveling, we can always go here to our polymodeling mode. So make sure set this to polymodeling. You can press the 2 on the keyboard to select points and then hold C and switch to, for example, polymodeling. And we can add some more models or polys ourselves here. So the reverse node will essentially flip the polygon. I want to make sure that my shape is in the positive z-axis. So here the z-axis is in the positive side. So before it was not. I will just make sure that that's the case. So I make in some stages I know roughly how to target the mesh. Because now I will simply do an extrusion of the shape and I will give it certain thickness. I will probably keep it small as this is quite the blade itself. This is the middle part of the blade. Could be small, like 0.01 in my case. You can see that this is just good enough. So if you look at it, it's just a little bit of thickness. Doesn't have to be too much, just something to get us going. Then one of the first things that we noticed, if I look back at my reference here, maybe let's place a null node. I want to already get in this sharp side edge here. So the actual blade part, I want to make that part already. And the easiest way to do this at this point is to just simply bevel here this edge. And we can manually select here the edges by, again, pressing 2 on the keyboard, or actually 3 to go edge mode. And we can hold shift to start to select the edges, or shift A to loop. And we can bevel this. We can also get this into a more procedural way. In case you are making changes later on the curve, because you can go back and change the curve, the selection might break. So we can do a group-based selection, and this will be a bit more solid. So we're going to say edge, or sharp edge maybe. This is going to be edges. This will be based on bounding box region, and we will now spawn essentially a cube here in our world. And we want this to be way smaller, so I will make it a bit smaller. We only wanted to cover the first part essentially, so space 3 to go in this mode. We roughly want it to be somewhere like this, where it just gets the border of the edge. So you can see we're just getting that border, and we also probably want to just move it so we only get that first edge part, as you can see. So I'll move my reference here. So we just want to have that selection, and this is just purely done in a more procedural way. And then we can just simply say, I would like to now bevel this element. And instead of having to bevel everything, we can say bevel the sharp edge. And we can now simply here bevel this. So this will automatically help us, as you can see, with beveling this. Now, one more thing that can break this is that if you look at our point distribution, we need to have enough points here to bevel this model. So we need to make sure that this line needs to be as flat as possible. So we don't have any points here going on. So this needs to be a flat polygon. So our beveling will probably stop here at the first point it comes across. So we can look at a reference. Let's see, reference. Let's view it from the side. And for me, it should actually be around here. So that's roughly what it should follow. So you can add more divisions to make it rounder, but of course you don't want that. You just want to have a nice sharp edge. And that's essentially actually our first part of the shape. So we have now our basic mesh. This could be our base shape. Now, a few more fun things to add will be, if I look at my reference again, is this big shape here. So this looks like some type of tube or sphere being stretched and then sort of subtracted to the shape. So we will try and replicate it as well. So I will probably spawn a tube here in the world, and I will try to align it with my reference. So I will rotate this uh, like here. So I'm in wireframe mode. So in case I will use W on the keyboard, but you can also manually set here the shading modes. So I will align here the line with the blade. So it's roughly this. I will manually here just scale this to something like so. It doesn't have to be perfect because we still need to subtract it, so it might still make a difference. I will also scale this down to roughly this point. Maybe I will do the same here, like so. And I probably want to close the shape here by pressing End caps. This will make sure the polygon is fully closed. And I will add more divisions. Let's say, in this case, we don't have to be scary. Let's say 60. And now let's do bevel. And let's bevel the shape. We will probably want to use the ignore flattened parts and increase this to a value and bevel the shape like so. Also here we can add a bunch of polygons. Don't need to be afraid to add some geometry there. And we want to just bevel it like so. And now we're going to place transform from center. This is a node quite useful because it automatically will get the centroids. If you don't have that node in case, it literally just fills in here the function called centroid in the pivot here. So that's simply how that is going on. And now comes the magic where we just simply will subtract the shape by boolean operation. So here input A, input B, and we're just going to say subtract. Now, one thing that I noticed here still is that actually my shape is probably still open. So here on the back side, it's an open 3D model. In my extrude node, I can actually enable here the output of the back, so it will make it into closed 3D shape. So that will actually help us a bit when we're doing subtraction. So you can see we're already subtracting the shape and a big cutout has been made. So a few things that I want to do is maybe let's again look at the reference here that I have. Let's view it on the side. I feel like there is definitely some stretching going on with the beveling. So I did it just a simple tube and I beveled it, which gives us a nice consistent bevel, but this feels like it's a bit more stretched out, and also probably want to squeeze the tube a bit. So here I will now need to make some changes. So actually when I rotated my cube before, I might reset the rotation and handle that here purely in the transform, just because it's easier now to work with the pivot here. So I can now press on the R and E to go into different modes to play around with this. So we can roughly here place that. I will squeeze it down also like so. And I will now have a shape that I can use to subtract it from. Maybe scale this a bit up. Maybe the rotation was too much, like so. So let's see how that looks like here in the modeling section. So it's way too much. So I need to move this back up here. And you can see we're now carving that shape in like the reference. So let's move it here on the side. And it probably will be something, I think we still need to squeeze it a bit more. I think something like this comes close to it, I feel. Yeah, if you look at the reference, this is pretty close to it. So we just need to play around with the positioning of it. Maybe the stretching should be a bit different. So that looks roughly close to it, maybe even a bit more subtraction here. It's a bit more. So I think something like this starts to look okay. Maybe the rotation slightly like so. So that's roughly what I want. So that looks pretty good to me. Again, it's not 100% perfect, but it's getting there. So we can always go back afterwards and tweak things here and there. Now to test our blade, so we can symmetry this. So I will also add a symmetry. I will rotate this on the other side like so. And if we want to already preview the Highpoly, I will simply use the voxel tool or the remesh tool in Houdini to simply remesh the blade. And so since our model is not the largest model, I have some troubles, of course, with larger values. So let's say 0.01. Let's see if we can get something. And that gives us a bit of a model. We can probably will do some smoothing iteration on this. So you can see that we will smooth out the blade. Maybe we can need to go even a bit lower. Let's see. So you can see that this will be our mesh. And in case you feel like we can still see some of the polygons here, all we need to do is go back here and add more. So let's say this is 100 polygons, so it's a bit smoother now. But later on, we will also increase the resolution of the remeshing. So aim for around 1 million to preview, so it goes quick and we can roughly see what's going on. So this is a good start here from my blade. Now we can also start to add some of the details that we have. So let's look at our reference again. I will just preview the null node here. Reference. We can see that we have a bunch of these holes drilled in the mesh. So these also need to come through that mesh as well. So let's make, for example, these 6 parts. So we can simply spawn a tube again. Let's rotate this. Let's also add gaps. We can set this to 50 divisions. I'm gonna make this a bit smaller and sort of roughly try to find here the center and then just scale down until we have that size. So it's roughly this size. Then we just simply say duplication. This will allow us to duplicate a node. Now this one thing here is that we don't have the pivot in our mesh. So I will also just copy paste what the transfer node here had. So I will copy and paste the centroid data. So here we also have a pivot. So we can say centroid X, centroid Y, and Z. In this case, we don't necessarily need to Z because it's already in that spot. And this will help us to now copy a second one. And here we can say the number, which in this case will be 3. And it will copy now 3 of these. Now we can copy paste this node again. And what we want to do is copy paste it downwards. So we can now have the 6 different options, or in this case, it places 9. So we need to push this back to 2. So you can see that this is a node that easily can copy, as you can see, all these shapes. So in case you wanted to make it a bit more fancy and add more of them, you can. It's up to you. So this will now be added into our system. So now here, let's place a merge node. And we want to merge these two together in the subtraction, and this will now be subtracted from that shape. And we will do roughly the same thing for this bigger shape. So we're just going to copy paste the tube, place it roughly in the center, and then tweak its radius like so. And we can copy paste it here. And let's do it one more time here for the bottom. This one is a bit bigger, so roughly get the middle and then just scale it up like so. And copy paste it in there. So these shapes are quite important because we will actually reuse them because they actually go through all the other elements of the blade. So we have sort of like 3 layers of blades, and this is only the first layer. So some of these holes will actually go through the other layers. So if I would now look at my mesh, we can see we have added in those parts. And this is roughly done. So I have most of the details there. Let's go to the next part, and we will start in a very similar way where I'm going to sort of like trace the shape and define that. So now I will put these shapes a bit here higher because like I said, I will definitely reference them around. I will now spawn a curve node again, but maybe in this case, let's do polygon curve. Let's go to spacebar 3 to the side. And let's trace now this middle plate, light gray colored middle plate. And this middle plate goes through most of the blade, except for these parts. Now, instead of making tracing the curve perfectly like we did before, we're going to make like just a very rough assumption and subtract our original blade with this blade. So we actually perfectly align with those shapes. So the only thing that we need to do is make a very rough shape, and I will just make it like so, very, very rough. And this just needs to go around the blade. I don't care too much. The only parts I care about is here. So let's make it so. Maybe we can fine tune that a bit in a moment. And let's close that again. So now I move here, this point, a bit like so. So this is my shape. That's all we want to do. We just want to now subtract some of the original shapes to get the good curve. So now let's hide the reference here. Again, I want to make sure that I probably want to reverse that. I'm gonna copy the reverse from before, place it over here. And a few things that we want to do is I definitely need to cut out the front part with the tube here, with this part, because we want to cut out that shape. And we're going to do that with Boolean operation, of course. So we'll grab a Boolean. This is, importantly enough, this will be our second shape. This will be, this is not a solid, this is actually a surface Boolean. We need to place also a transfer node. So transfer from centroid. And I will now just here carve away that shape. And let's see how well that would work here on the side. So you can see we're carving away a very equalized space compared to this shape. So this just makes it a bit more clean in the end. Again, if we will move this shape, we essentially will do two things. We will move the silhouette of this part and also the intersection of that part. So that way it's again a bit more procedural in case you want to tweak it around. So here we now can, if I click on this again, maybe put it back a bit. Then we also need to do an extrusion. So simply do poly extrude, and let's close it here as well. So now comes the magic where I want to subtract the base shape with this shape. And we will go back here to our extrude that we had here before. And we're going to do, again, subtraction of both. So I will subtract my current shape that I'm working on with our base shape that we had from the beginning. So if we subtract these now, or we actually need to set this to intersect this now, we have a perfect cutout with all the curves and lines that we had before. Again, because it will be very difficult to perfectly match based on tracing the line. It will save us so much time just doing this at one go, because trying to perfectly trace this line will take us ages to get it like nice. So that's roughly it for almost this shape. The only thing left is again also these few holes that we drilled in this. We're going to again do a subtraction, and we will subtract these shapes. So I will grab a merge node, and oh, this is maybe merging too much. I will redirect the lines like so. And now we have those shapes as well. So in case you want to make this bigger or different, we can do that as well. So maybe let's go and take a look at the reference first. So let's see how it was at our reference. So what we can see is that we sort of have a chamfering going on here in these parts here as well, roughly. So we want to recreate that as well. And there are a few ways of doing that. So one way of doing this is we can simply here place a bevel on the shape. So poly bevel, plug it in, and just drag here the bevel. It's not going to be perfect by default. So what I will do is in our group settings, let's click on primitive. So we'll press 4 on the keyboard, click on the primitive, press enter, and this will now bevel or chamfer that edge. So that will help us. You can do something similar before where I made like a selection here. I made like a selection. So you can try to make a bounce on only the region that you want and then bevel that as well. In this case, we just bevel everything on that front side. So maybe you can make it a bit smaller, make it a bit bigger. I probably want to make it somewhere like so. Oh, I actually selected two primitives in my case. So let's only get the front primitive. Yeah, that's a bit better. So now that is done. And I can merge this, and I want to merge these two now too. Another thing that we can do, things that are not necessarily super procedural, we can mark them as a red color. So this is not a very procedural way because I literally filled in a number here manually. That's something to sometimes keep in mind. So now if I look at my blades, it's actually not going to work because I forgot to lay them on top of each other. There is also a procedural way of doing that, which is called the match by size node. So this will match things from different inputs. So we connect our original input or original blade in the second one, and the current blade that we want to move, that's our first input. We want to set everything to none except the z-axis. So the z-axis in my case is for this depth. So none, none, and then the z-axis will be set to min and max. And now you can see if I move to the top here, it actually moves that shape perfectly on the input shape. So whatever I input here, it will match to that shape. So if I now look at my result here and hide the reference here, I now have a perfectly matching geometry here. So again, if you want to offset this, in case you want to offset, we can always here manually offset this. It's just a slider, but by default, it will perfectly fit on top of each other, which is very useful to have. So that's our second blade part. Looking at the reference, if I would go back at my reference here, we see that we have a bunch of these bolts going on. I will do that as lost because I will make a small system for that. So we have a very easy way of making bolts and adding bolts to the blade. Now the last part of the shapes is again these sort of like top layers with the handle. So those are the last parts that I want to add now in this network. We can also again add a frame here around this. This is sort of the middle blade part. And now let's do that last part. And for the last part, again, been no big surprise here. We're going to start again with a curve. I'm probably going to take a polygon curve again. It's up to you what you prefer. This is a preference if you want to work with Bezier curves or polygon curves. And I will start to trace here the shapes as well. We will do the same thing before where we don't care too much about how this curve will flow, as it's essentially the same for most of the plates. I will just reuse my original shape. So let's say our point starts from here. Doesn't matter too much. And I will just place a few points here and there to make this curve, like so. Let's also do something like this. I will also add this tube later on. I will make again a subtraction, so we have a nice clean subtraction of the shapes. And we're just going to click here our way through this blade, so it doesn't have to be perfectly round. And this is then one part. Let's do now the other part. Let's just start here, clicking. So you can see that this sort of goes to here. And this roughly goes like so. So connect the line, and that's it. I will do the handle separately because the handle has different thickness and shaping. So I will do that in a different node network. I will now clean up maybe here this corner a bit. I'm not super happy with how I was drawing this. Let's clean up the shape a bit so it's a bit better, and that's a bit better. So again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We can always do some processing afterwards as well. Now let's go and remove the reference. What you can sometimes see is that one is reversed and one is not reversed. I will make a small system now to make sure that they're correct. Let's do a group node. In this group node, we will say get reversed or something, so reverse. And we basically want to check the direction of the normals. So where is the normal of the mesh pointing? I will lower the angle, and I will basically say that everything that's looking in the minus z-axis needs to be reversed. So reverse. So I just need to fill in the group node, and now we are having the two correct shapes. Just like before, what we want to do is we want to grab here the data from our original shape and do a subtraction. So Boolean subtraction, grabbing our original shape here and subtract them like so. This will probably need to be set to intersection, and this is surface data. So we have the two nice plates. So again, the curves are perfectly following my rest of the plate. So I don't have to worry too much about this. And even on, if I want to change this data, you can see I can just change the curves. And if I change this, you can see it moves with it. So we have something a bit flexible. Now let's talk a bit about then adding the two cylinder shapes here. So one is over here, one is over here roughly. So maybe I just grab one of the tubes that I had before because it's already roughly positioned in a good way. I will just go here, place it like so. And I think that's roughly already in a good position actually. I don't think I need to change too much. Maybe the radius slightly bit bigger. So that's one. Let's copy paste another one and let's place it over here and scale it up. Then these can be merged together and also be subtracted from our shape. So here, let's hide the reference here. Make sure it's set to surface again because this is still a 2D plane and we're just subtracting the faces. So that is correct. Only thing left to do is give it some actual extrusion. So extrude. The extrusion itself could be quite small, I think. Could be the same as we did before. You could probably close the back shape as well again. We again want to sort of like bevel or chamfer the edges, and we can do that by making a group and getting the front. So similar like we did before. So this is now called the front group. And we can, for example, here use the normals again to get only that front primitive. So that will be useful again in the bevel node, filling in the front group, and now we can bevel that like so. Now in later stages, I probably want to make a bit better Highpoly version of this, and maybe already tackle this quickly here for you, because I want to make sure the Highpoly looks good enough. And so let's make a quick subdivision tool. It isn't going to be perfect, but it will work. So let's fuse everything together in case it's not really merged yet. Then I will do another beveling, and I will bevel the edges, like you can see. But I will bevel based on the flatness of the edge. So this will be, let's say, 35 maybe. Yeah, so you can see that we are beveling only then those parts. And after that, we can do what we call subdivision, so subdivision modeling, and now it will be smoother. So you can see that it might create some artifacts, and that is because subdivision doesn't handle n-guns always very well. So we have very large n-gun here of our main shape, because doing modeling is actually easier sometimes with n-guns. So here, let's triangulate that mesh, and let's do that subdivision again. So here, let's move into shade mode. But yeah, this is roughly how we can quickly make something a bit more of a high poly. Maybe I just do normal. So this will then be useful in a later stage, so the shapes will look a bit better. So this is not the perfect system. Don't take this as like a perfect tool you can copy paste everywhere. It's just something that can work for a few things here and there. So if we were now to wrap this up to a frame, so this will be the two shapes, and if we merge this with our end result, we will now here have, again, we need to match this. So I forgot the matching part. So we can copy paste the match node. This is now our other input to match with. And this will be changed to this like so. So we will have now these shapes. And if we just voxelize that mesh, it will give us an idea of how the Highpoly looks like. And that's roughly decent. So again, if you still see some of these sort of edges, you can still see them roughly here. The only thing we need to do is just basically increase here our shape. We need to add more points here. So like I said before, we can do that by, for example, selecting the points and beveling them and just add more points. So now we have a bunch of them. But again, this is not necessarily super procedural, and I will hide it maybe for the moment, like so. So we have something that's starting to look interesting. So now let's focus on the last part here, the handle part, where we actually grab the blade. And I will do the same thing before, where I'm going to draw the shape. And we will display our reference again, and I will do a curve node, curving from polygons. So here I will again do the same thing as I did before. I will subtract the shape from the other shape, so I don't have to draw them perfectly. So I'm just going to draw the curves roughly like so, and then just draw around it. Doesn't matter too much. I will now fine tune the curve, maybe a bit more. This needs to be higher. I think something like this is fine. I missed this part a bit, but it will be fine enough for our tests. So let's switch back again. Make sure this is in the Z facing area. Then we will do the same thing here. I will now copy just basically this node, and we just have that shape immediately. So this is my handle shape. We have it perfectly based on again our shape. A few more things that we need to do here as well is we also need to copy paste this as well, because we want to have this cylindrical shape. If I look at my reference, we had that sort of cut out from the cylinder. So I just have that here as well. And then a few more tricky parts is then the carvings of the handle. So let's talk a bit about that. Let's hide the reference for now. So what I will do is I will make an extrusion, so poly extrude. I will give it a large extrude, because if I look at my blade here, this sort of has a sort of triangle pointy output shape. So you can see that this is sort of going up to one single line here in the middle. So I want to recreate that line basically. And I will do that again by subtracting different shapes together. So let's spawn one big cube. I think the cube by default is larger than my mesh, so that's good. And I will do another transform from centroid. Then what I will do with that is I want to look at from the front, so spacebar 3. I want to enable my reference. I'm going to press W for the wireframe. Probably want to rotate this 45 degrees. I want to align my cube here now. So I want to align this line with my line on the reference here. So those need to be roughly the same. I will press also M to switch out the pivot modes here. So we're gonna roughly get that line like so. So as you can see, I rotated my cube 45 degrees and I matched it up with the line. Now the only thing left here to do is to scale this bit down. I'm gonna switch to M with my pivot. I'm gonna stretch this out like so. Gonna switch M with my pivots again. Once we have sort of a shape like this, I will subtract it and let's see how that looks like. Let's put a boolean to intersection and let's see how that looks like. Maybe let's go into flat mode here again. So you can see we have roughly that shape here that we want. It's a bit maybe too much. Let's make it like so. And we have roughly that shape. So if you're not happy with it, we can always go and tweak it. So this is the moment where we want to fine tune that shape. And I'm gonna make it something like this. I think that looks good enough. And then let's also bevel this shape, because we can see from the reference, so I just hide it here. We can see from the reference that the sides of this handle are beveled a lot. And I can actually do this right now, or actually could have done this before. And so let's see if I press now 2 on my keyboard and select here the side edges. Let's do the same here as well. Let's select the edges and then hold C and then bevel mode. And then we can roughly get some beveling in like so. So we're already making that big bevel here on the side. So you can see that by default Houdini will stop here beveling when it reaches its limits. So there is a tab here in the beveling called collision and limits. So this will automatically here respect the limitations of beveling based on the geometry. And that's roughly good enough for me. It doesn't have to be a big bevel. We can always smooth it out later on, but that's roughly what I want. So the few more things that I want to add here is the handles for your fingers. So let's make that. I will probably also do the same thing where I make this tube and then subtract them. Yeah. So let's put a tube down here. We can make this quite high poly again. Let's say 50 polygons. Let's say close the shape, rotate this 90 degrees. I will probably use another transform from centroids because in case we want to squeeze it, it's easier to do it with the node. So let's put that shape roughly here in the middle. Let's scale this down and then rotate this along that shape roughly. So that should be roughly it. And I will, like I said, maybe I'll squeeze the shape like so. So I can easily squeeze and subtract. Then we just need to do a boolean operation with subtraction. So we can look at the results. So our shape is a bit too far. So we can here curve that in nicely, as you can see. So I think maybe our scaling needs to be even a bit more smaller. Oh. Like so. And let's push it back here and maybe I squeezed too much. This is getting roughly in the good direction. Maybe let's put it back a bit more. And I think that's roughly where I want it to be. We can rotate a bit, play around with it. We can also just do the duplication node again. So duplicate. The pivot point is roughly here. I'm just gonna grab it like this. So the thing is that in the actual reference, this is not evenly spaced out. If I look here at my blade, I mean, the picture that I have, you can definitely see that here, the spacing between this part and this part is like almost double. So the spacing is not equal in my image, or maybe because I stretched the image a bit, it might be different, but I will now basically made it equal. In case you want to change this, you can just quickly press, for example, 4 on your keyboard and go into editing mode and start editing the shapes manually. I'm just going to keep the distance, I think, like we have a nice distant shape. Then another part is the cutout at the top and the bottom of the handle. So here we can see that we have a cutout both on those sides. So let's, for the top part, let's make it easy by just placing a box. I will make the box roughly, I will look at this shape. I will look at the top part of my network and I will place the box. I will make it smaller first. Let's make it way smaller actually. So, and I will place here the box roughly at this part. So it touches the border. So when we start to subtract, we roughly have the same thickness. So if I would now, again, merge these things around and merge it like so, we will have the same thickness for those parts and those parts. So we'll nicely, smoothly transition. So this cube, we want to align it roughly with those handles that we made. And going to place it roughly like here. Now what we want to do with this is that if I look at the cube, you're just going to simply press 3 on the keyboard for edge mode, select this bottom edge, going to bevel mode, and we're just going to make a big bevel, like so. And this will then, here, as you can see, nicely bevel that edge. So we can add more subdivisions that will help us later on. And now it's essentially playing a bit with the cube in case you don't like how the beveling is done. So we can move the cube. We can also here, if you select the cube and press 3 again and press T, we can move this down. So you can see we can stretch out that beveling, which can sometimes be very nice. So maybe we do a bit of that. And yeah, now it comes to again like fine tuning that perfectly. I just leave it like this. I think it's good enough for this shape. Then the bottom shape will be slightly, I guess, use the same idea. Maybe we're going to use the centroid transform again. So we have the shape. Make sure you're switching the handles. I'm going to just rotate this 180. And let's merge it already. And let's place this roughly like here. And then we have here our handle. Again, not perfect. I can maybe rotate this slightly, move it a bit around to see where I can get the best fit here. I can also rotate the cube in many directions to get exactly what I want. I think again, I'm just going to leave it like it is. And another thing that I wanted to add here is we can see the big hole here that we also need to add. So let's go back. I think it was this shape. Yeah. So this shape also needs to be referenced in the merge node. And now we have that like we expected. And this part is roughly then also done. So what we want to do now is probably merge these two plates essentially. Merge one, done. So now we have that as one chunk. And we're going to match align this both with the same. And that's roughly already getting there. So we now have our blade. So we're almost there. So we can see we already did some pretty good modeling and we have shapes that look interesting and cool based on our references. Now, the few more things that I want to add are probably the bolt setup and talking a little bit about making the Highpoly. And that's roughly what will be covered in the video. Now, to add the bolts. So let's talk a bit about with this shape first. So if we look at a reference, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 small bolts here in that top plate. Well, what I want to do is I want to just spawn a point for each one of them. I can do that with the add node. So the add node itself, I would just here say number of points is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And in my viewport now, I will preview my add node. I will switch to the front view and all the points are now collapsed on the middle. And I will just grab a point and place it over here. I will also maybe preview my points. So here I can see I can now drag the points. So I grab a point, place it where I want it. So that's it. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. We can fine tune this by simply having the handle. So what we want to do is for each point, we want to copy a certain shape, subtract that from the other shape and copy a bolt. That's a sort of summary of what's going on. So let's do copy 2 points, which is a very common node in Houdini. So we're going to copy points on the shape. So let's say we want to copy a tube like we did before. Say a tube model, maybe has, say, 40 divisions. Probably going to make it very tiny. You can see we also need to rotate this in a different axis. So in the orientation mode, let's see the orientation. So this will be the orientation. This needs to be way smaller in scale. So I think, yeah, in this case, that sounds good. Maybe a little bit less. What we want to do with this then is, of course, do the subtraction with the boolean. So subtracting these, basically essentially the holes in there. So we have room for a bolt. We can also play around with the shape a bit and maybe let's squeeze this. So what we can do is we can also make it a chamfer by default by doing something like so. So if I would preview my geometry here, and if I click on my tube, and if I can move them around, I can make something like this, like you can see the chamfering. So we have that automatically there. And then the other part is, of course, we need to add in the bolts. So we're going to make a simple tube. I will copy paste this actually, because that was roughly our size. I will make this back into a simple shape. I probably want to center this in the world. Maybe hide the reference. I will 3D model a simple bolt like so. I will click on this edge, just bevel like so. I will make a tube, or I'm actually copy pasting the tube so I have the same orientation and size. Set this to 6. Squeeze this and subtract this like so. And then we have simple bolt. Maybe it's a bit smaller. That looks better. And then this is my shape to copy on the points. And let's merge that. So this is my actually new shape, and I can merge in the bolts with that. So let's see how that looks like. The bolts are there, but they're not placed on the correct position. So let's just keep it simple and just do a transform. Let's don't overdo anything, just move it. And I can now fine tune this easily. So if you think the bolts are too thick, too large, we can very easily change this now. So if you don't like the positioning of them as well, so in this case, maybe I was not super accurate on this part. So I can now manually go back here and just grab that part and be like, it should be here. Follow. So we can always tweak this. It's a very easy way now. It's a quite simple system that gives us a lot of leverage. So if I now go back to my Highpoly, you can see we have nice bolts. If I do the voxeling, I might actually break a bit or smooth it too much, but yeah, this will work quite nice. So then the other part is the other bolts. We have more of them, and they are mainly are, let's go back to the reference. And there mainly are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them on this middle plate. So we can essentially copy paste our system here fully. So this, what I created here, is the bolt system. And I can copy paste this chunk onto our middle plate over here. And I probably want to do it after or before that part. Let's maybe keep the graph a bit clean and just paste the chunk in over here. So this is my new input, output. So we will have the same locations of the bolts. In this case, I only had 5, so let's switch this to 5. Let's first of all move them into the correct position. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I can always again tweak this in a later moment if it needs to be more accurate. Then in terms of subtracting from the shape, I probably want them to be a bit bigger. As you can see, the reference is a bit bigger, so we're going to make this a bit bigger. So we're going to here increase this slightly, like so. And let's see how the bolts will go into it. The other bolts can also be scaled up. Let's also just place a transform over here and just scale up the bolts like so. Maybe we can squeeze them slightly like that. We can also transform them a bit more inwards. And then we have that system. So let's see how that looks like. And that looks pretty good. So again, if you're not happy with how they're placed, so let's say maybe it needs to move slightly a bit more over here. And this one, maybe it needs to be just a bit more over here. Maybe that one just a bit more over here. So it's very easy to just accurately like fine tune it to my actual model based on, it doesn't, my reference is not perfect. So sometimes you just need to look at other pictures and see how things go. So this is roughly my blade. So we are very close to finishing this up. I'm gonna assign a unique ID value on each piece. So I will do create attribute. And in this attribute, I'm gonna call this ID. And this will be a primitive attribute and gonna be a string. And I'm just gonna call this piece number A. And I will do this the same for other pieces. So I will copy paste this node. I will now place here the same as well. So this is another geometry piece that I made. I'm going to call this B. We also have something which is called the bolts. I'm not going to give it ABC. I'm actually going to call it just bolts. So we can reference that in a later moment. Here we have something similar. This is then actually called piece number C. And I will also call this bolts. So the reason why I did this is when I merge everything together, because this is what I roughly want to export, I can still roughly get the data from different parts. So if I would say color this geometry based on the ID number, we can say color from attribute. We probably want to switch this to primitive since it's primitive, and now I can get a different ID map, as you can see. This can be very useful for texturing to get the different pieces. Let's see here. So I can easily get the different pieces without any problem. So if I want to only target the bolts or something else, I can easily do that. So this is just a mask that I will generate as well for substance, for example. Now, in case you want to preview the blade a bit more, you can also just simply color the shape as well. So here we have a very light gray color for the blade. We will do some mid-gray, middle gray for the middle plate. Our bolts could be pretty dark. Let's say this. Here we have the same, so our bolt color, and our plate can be a bit like so. So this could be used like to simply preview. So we can simply preview the blade a bit nicer here in Houdini, just with some basic colors. So you have roughly an idea about how it could look like already. Now, when it comes to making low poly and high poly, we can do a few things. So here I will basically here remesh everything. So the remeshing will merge, as you can see, like it will merge the plates into one big shape. We don't necessarily want it. We can also see that the bolts are essentially, basically merged and blurred down. What we will do is we actually do a loop for each named primitive. So we essentially made our ID value as a looping value. So we're going to loop over the ID value. And this will make us loop 4 times. So essentially we will copy the remeshing tool and we will place it over here. And we will now do the same remeshing, but on the different pieces alone. So when we have the final output in a moment, we can see that we're not merging everything together. And we can see a nice difference between the different pieces now. So this will bake nicely into some round edges here. If you want this Highpoly to be cleaner, you can bump up the quality a bit or play around with the smoothing and other options it has. But that will roughly be already good enough in my case to start making and texturing this. You can also, in case again, we can copy over the attribute. Now, if you want, you can also place an attribute copy and copy paste the ID attribute. So remeshing means that sometimes it will lose all of the attributes and we want to copy the attribute ID back again. So if we preview the color here, it's not showing because Houdini always prefers the color in the point. So we have point color and primitive color. So we are duplicating the color. I will maybe just simply promote the ID value from primitive to a point. So let's say from primitives to point, what is called ID or the index. Now switching the color to points will now give you this. So you can bake this out again for Substance Painter or other texturing processing. So we can just simply mask things in and out. So that will be my Highpoly essentially. I will just simply place FBX node and just export this. Now for my low poly, I will basically merge everything together and just poly reduce it. For the remeshing for the low poly, I changed some values. I did projection of original with some smoothing and also add a little bit of erosion and dilation. So it will merge the shapes sometimes a bit better. You can play around with this to see what you prefer. And then we go to poly reducing. I'm gonna go to a specific poly count number, and probably I'm aiming around maybe let's say 7,000. That should be enough to have like a high quality asset in your game. Definitely more focused for like, yeah, first person to maybe third person where it needs to be closer to camera where we can have that additional poly count. So you can see around 8,500 is already like a really good value where we still have all the details. We even have some details in the bolts still there. We can even remove the bolts from the low poly if you want that. It's just a matter of changing the setup a bit. After that, I will just do auto UVing. Now, this model might not be perfect unwrapped. I will just see how that goes. We can look at the UV. It's not perfect. We can try to play around with some of the rotation steps that give them some more options to rotate. We can also play around with the padding in terms of resolution. So it equally distributes some of the pieces a bit. So there is some options you can play around with here, but this model won't be perfectly unwrapped. I do have some videos on unwrapping in Houdini. If you're interested in learning a bit more about that, you can watch the video. To finish off, I will just sometimes place a soft normal node, and sometimes I will enable here this harden UV seams. That can sometimes help with baking, and then again, we will do the same as before, where I just simply export here the result. And you can see this is roughly what I have in Substance Painter. So I have the X with some basic texturing on it. So yeah, usually in Substance, you can bake them very easily, nicely. You may also here, like I mentioned, I baked out that ID map. So this is what we built in Houdini as well on the Highpoly. So I just baked that down. It makes it very easy to assign the materials. So we just have all that data here. And this is then roughly how it could look like. So I went quite simplistic on materials, and then from here I just export this into Unreal, and what you see now on screen is just again roughly the results that I had in Unreal by using this process going from Houdini to Substance to Unreal, making this 3D model. So hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to like and subscribe. See you on the next one.